All right, so thanks again for doing this. My first question to you is tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started in the in the community.
Hello, my name is Natalia Aiza. I became part of sort of the mental health community because I worked at a Chinese foster care home, orphanage, and I felt a lot of desire to learn more about emotional wellness as it pertains to physical and mental development. So I am super happy to be talking to you about my current practice, which is specializing in OCD, and specifically OCD with neurodiverse folks.
hmm So tell me a little bit about the work that you do. Let's dive into it. Tell me a little bit about the work that you do in the mental health community, because you just said you work in with OCD and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, what I do is we're doing a type of therapy called exposure response prevention. So, that's a type of therapy where you basically face your fears to reduce those fears. So, in the OCD community, we have something that is a intrusive thought or an obsession, and then it becomes a compulsion, which is something that we do in order to feel better about our intrusive thought. So, an example being if someone has an intrusive thought, grocery stores are dangerous because, in our neighborhood, there was a shooting there and people started to have worries about that. The compulsion is to stay home or avoid that grocery store or only order food. So that's an example of how facing your fear will help you get desensitized to that fear and better be able to access things in your life that you had accessed before.
Mm. That's a really good example, but I bet there are a ton of other examples that can apply to this too. I know this, I'm going out on a limb here, but possibly like, when it comes to like relationships and like having to sort of really figure out how to sort of move on from that, even though it was painful. Um, which I get that for some people it can be hard to do. Um, and that I know it's not a really good example, but I just thought of
That's
that.
great example, actually. It's a great example. So, what happens with a person with OCD after they get their heart broken is then they have the intrusive thought when they're going to date again. It might be, well, I'm going to have my heart broken again. And so the compulsion might be avoidance. The compulsion might be to be overly careful with the next person that they date to mask their neurodiversity, for example, if they're a neurodiverse person because of fear of getting rejected. There's all sorts of unhealthy behaviors that can come from fear and most notably from anticipatory fear. So it's like fear of the fear or fear of the heartbreak.
hmm So, tell me a little bit about what methods or approaches that you use with your patients. I know you mentioned that briefly, but like in detail, what yeah.
Yeah. So when we do exposure therapy, first of all, we're making sure that the person feels safe, that they feel a connection with their therapist, that the therapist sees them as a full human and all the other aspects of their life and their being that's not just OCD or their anxiety. So we start there of like forming a real connection. Once trust is established, if trust is established, then the client and I or whoever's working with them is creating something called a fear hierarchy. And that's basically a list of things that your anxiety tells you you cannot or should not do because they feel unsafe. However, these are not things that are actually unsafe. They are things that feel that way due to the emotional weight of them. And so when we create this fear hierarchy, I really look at the client's deciding on what is their value system, what is most important for them to get back into their life.
Hmm. So, what can we do to sort of um assure that people, you know, really reduce that fear and that sort of anxiety of like what we talked about, getting rejected or, going to the grocery store. How do we sort of reduce that to make them say, okay, uh, you can feel safe, you can feel comfortable, like, yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. And the way exposure response prevention works is actually we don't try to convince someone that they won't feel uncomfortable. In fact, we embrace it.
Mm.
We say this will be uncomfortable. And I really still believe that you can do it. So it's part of the energy of you can do hard things. You can do it scared. It's really hard. It can be very, very anxiety provoking. However, OCD wants us to believe that we can just make our life smaller and smaller and smaller, and then we're going to be happy. But the truth is, we might face less day to day anxiety, but it's really difficult to be happy if you are, not doing a lot of things because you're afraid of what might happen.
Mm, that makes sense. So, moving on, like what impact does this kind of work have on the mental health community? Like, like doing this kind of work, how has it had an impact on people who've come to see you and talked about their problems with OCD and sort of figuring out how can they sort of get their life back in on track?
I have seen just such transformations with people with severe OCD. It can be like really, really limiting. It can absolutely shut everything down, work, social. Um, it can make a person basically not leave the house when OCD is very severe. So I have seen people go from that basis of just being in daily, a daily sense of fear and panic and shutting down almost every positive aspect of their life, including bonds with other people, to being back in the world and work, life, play, friends, dating, all that back on the table. So I absolutely love this work. I can give you a few concrete examples of transformations, if that's useful. I would say, just in general, OCD therapy works really well. It is when it's needed, when it's the therapy that a person is indicated for a person's mental health disorder, it is incredibly effective.
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, that's awesome. So like, to kind of wrap this up, what can other people, take away from this conversation? How can OCD be used as a tool to not, like we just discussed, not to like minimize it or eradicate it, because it's still going to be part of people's lives, but like making sure that they know how to sort of uh cope with it and yeah, because um I know if I don't know if I'm asking this right, but like, yeah, how do we sort of make sure that OCD isn't stigmatized into something negative?
Yes. Well, I'm a big believer. This is OCD Awareness Week, so thank you for having me on this week. Um, OCD, yes, we do have a lot of work to do to reduce stigmatization, because people think of us as, germaphobes or people that want things incredibly organized. That's just such a reduction and such a misunderstanding of what OCD actually is. So more awareness, more podcasts like this, like really talking about OCD, and for people to understand that OCD is a lifelong disorder. It's not something that you cure and then it's gone. It's something that's always with you. It's a tendency that your brain has. And those of us who have it, like me, we like we really like to be able to see ourselves as, living in harmony with our OCD, knowing that like this is something that we accept about our brains, but we never allow the OCD to control our lives again, because that can be so incapacitating.
Mm-hmm. A bonus question, like what can people learning to study, mental health in general, like if they want to get into the OCD field, what tools and strategies can they learn to sort of help them be more prepared to dive into that topic more because they might dive into it like in they might think that the subject of OCD is very new. So, like, what tips and strategies would you advise them to sort of consider when they get into the mental health profession?
Absolutely. So, the gold standard for treatment is exposure response prevention, and it has been around for quite some time. I think like 50, 60 years is off the top of my head. I would strongly suggest to people to look at resources and education at the International OCD Foundation. It's the IOCDF .org. We can drop that in the comments. This organization has a lot of free resources, support groups. It has directories of OCD experts in your area. And does a tremendous amount of global advocacy. If you're listening to this and you have OCD yourself, please consider joining us for the annual OCD conference this next summer. It will be in Chicago, and it is truly magical because it is a combination of lived experience, people with OCD, plus the professionals that specialize in OCD. And we all come together once a year to learn from each other and grow together. So I'm super excited, and come find me if you decide to go. And I will welcome you into our very, tight knit and welcoming community.
It's very cool. Yeah,
Mm,
should be a fun event. Yeah.
yes, it is great.
All right.